Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Congratulations on the film, both of you, and thank you so much for being here. Eva, very few films capture in almost like a Venn diagram-like style, I feel like, in watching your film. The poetry and grace of watching memories pile up upon each other and become art and help a character become who she's supposed to be. In adapting Graham Swift's beautiful novella to the screen via Alice Birch's screenplay, I'm wondering what were some keys for you in making sure it was done the right way and kind of keeping the tone the way that you saw it.
So what do you mean exactly? What is the question exactly?
The question is, was there a key to you to making sure that the tone of the novella and the beauty of the one day becoming sort of the root of one character's life? Was there a challenge for you in that, and making sure that it stayed kind of true to the vision you saw in it originally?
Well, I mean, I tried to not fuck up in during the casting process and like choose somebody who could actually carry the film and make you not yawn. I guess my biggest fear was to film just a pretty thing because that would have been like the exact opposite direction that was required for the film. And I just realized, when I was searching for actresses that we still had a strong stigma as to what represented a leading lady. And, when I came across Odessa, I just felt an immense sense of relief, where I was like, oh, thank God Jane is there. I think, we seldom see representations of women on screen where they are allowed to explore this thing that I see in life quite often, actually, of strength and vulnerability. It's just not mutually exclusive, and I think it's quite extraordinary to see a character like this, and I think that was like the center, like the gravity of the film. I tried to call the film Gravity, but it was taken.
It already exists.
I'm going to make jokes tonight.
That's okay. Odessa, in figuring out Jane and kind of getting a handle on her, were there keys to her for you in kind of her inner life and finding a way to kind of anchor yourself to her in some ways?
I think one of my favorite lines in the movie is when Donald calls her an occupational observer of life, because, sometimes I feel that way as an actor, not to pat myself on the back too much, but I do feel pretty quietly observative occasionally, and that was a very nice entry point, because as Eva and I have been talking about today, this is why we're giggling, because we've done press all day, we've lost it. But what we were talking about today was that like there's actually a lot of the movie where Jane doesn't speak, and so much of it is kind of, just watching her go from place to place and maybe imagining what she might be thinking. So in order to kind of create what she was thinking, I had both, I think, my own experience as an occupational observer of life, and also, to bring it back to your previous question, I had Graham Swift's novel, because that is essentially told, it reveals a lot of her inner monologue, reveals a lot of her character. So in terms of kind of, finding a linchpin for who she is, or doing any kind of research, I think ultimately it's like, we all know what loss feels like. That's not hard to research. And then we just kind of have to figure out how to deal with it, and that's what the movie's about.
Eva, actually, Odessa has brought up a point that I was going to bring up later, but the stillness in the film is so beautiful. The film is so beautiful in so many ways, but there's such a stillness to it, and it echoes in lots of different ways. Obviously, the post-World War I, milieu and the way these families are feeling and dealing with their loss. But it's almost like there's different kinds of stillness in the film, isn't there? There's obviously the stillness of Paul and Jane, and the stillness of the Nivens, and the stillness of the family. But there's a quietude to them, and I'm wondering, in kind of capturing those images and making sure that they kind of had different meanings. What was that like for you to kind of be able to kind of have those images of stillness mean so much?
I didn't think about that at all. Sorry.
She's so good, it just happens naturally.
Just right there.
God, okay, I'm gonna try to go your way. Okay, so I think that one of my inspirations was I just tried to think what inspired these people at the time, and photography was a very new medium. So most of their mental representations was based on paintings. So I think part of the stillness in my imaginary came from the composition of like classical painting. And then I think that, like British people at the turn of the century, oh, come on, who am I kidding? Like, I think it's still happening at the moment. Like, processing emotions was just not very easy. So I think a lot of it has to do with that. And thank God, British actors and Australian actors like Odessa, pretty good at that, which I think tends to go really well with filmmaking because it's so much about looks and the unspoken. I think films tend to do really well when you don't get too verbose, So it's kind of this, quiet, perfect storm where the emotions sort of appear on their faces. And I guess, to be very honest with you, I was also very much inspired by some films of the 90s that I was completely obsessed with as a young cinephile, like Chungking Express and In the Mood for Love, where so much of it is about what's not going to happen and the nostalgia of what could have happened. And that's very much what the relationship between Jane and Paul is about. And at the same time, they have the sincerity of knowing it's completely true and sincere. It might not be possible to fully realize it, but I think they go as far as they can. And I think the quietness and maybe like the stillness lies in the intimacy. Yeah. I think you can sit still when there is real intimacy.
It's interesting that you mentioned In the Mood for Love, because that the feel of that film, or even like the Garden of the Finzi Contini, is like there's aspects of that in this film in so many ways, so beautiful. Odessa, in working with Josh O'Connor, who plays Paul, I'm wondering if the two of you, in some ways, and maybe both of you working with Paul, had a sense of what would have happened, what could have happened had the accident not happened. I almost wonder if, as you guys were preparing for scenes together, imagining backstories, or imagining, I guess, what would be called, moving forward stories, a sense of what would have happened to them had the accident not happened, like what their life could have been like, in sort of kind of preparing for the characters.
I have my ideas.
You have your own ideas? Yeah.
But I feel like they're spoilers.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, I can share them, but
Well, that's okay.
Do you want to know?
Sure.
I mean, I'm a real grump. Like, I don't think that they're actually in love. I think that they love each other very dearly, but I think that they both accept a life that they're never going to be together. I think that what would have happened is that Josh would have gone off, Paul would have gone off and married Emma, and Jane may have stayed in the house a little bit longer than she ended up staying in the house, but I think ultimately they still would have found their paths. I think that the movie kind of doesn't, to me it doesn't pose a question of like, when is the moment that like all of our decisions are made for us? It's more like, when do we realize, to make these decisions, or how to make these decisions? And tragedy is a great catalyst in those realizations. But I don't think that it would have been a happily ever after story. I think that they're both very distinct people with distinct lives.
I agree with the fact that they would not have been ever like a happy ending, but I disagree with you. I think they're in love. Ooh. I'm a romantic. I'm French. She's Australian. She's a pragmatic. Gotta be real. But no, I guess maybe we're talking about the same thing. For me, I think that it's not because they're not going to have a happy ending that they're not in love. I think they just acknowledge, they know that it's not going to go anywhere officially ever, but the sincerity of the depth of their love is like real.
It feels like we're making the movie again and having another conversation about it. There's a lot of these conversations like, no, but I think that this is, but I think that this is.
Well, because what I love is that it also kind of comes back to the idea of when she answers the question of when she became a writer, when she was born, when she was given the typewriter, and then the third one's The Secret. And having that secret, no matter what it is, for any artist, like as they have that epiphany of when they became the person they were sort of meant to become, what would it, if something would have been different, what could have changed? And I think that it's an interesting sort of hypothetical to think about, in some ways, yeah.
I think she would have found her path no matter what.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I didn't write the damn thing, but this is my idea.
Right.
There's no need for Paul.
Paul, redundant, whatever. They had some good times.
Eva, in preparing some research, you read the diaries of a lot of maids and
at least 100, yes.
Yeah. What was? I mean, when you found things in those
read
diaries,
two diaries.
What were they? What did you find there that was sort of illuminating for you in a lot of ways?
You know what? I have to say I was pretty astounded at the harshness of the life of the time, which I was aware of because I've got a very academic background in classical studies, but I guess I hadn't gone back to that in a long time, and the level of uncertainty and stability, financial instability when you're a woman at the turn of the century is just mind-blowing. Basically, your life could turn to absolute horror in half a second. So I think it just made people more pragmatic. Romanticism is kind of cute and nice when you've got the means. But when you don't have it, it just becomes a question of survival. People at that time did not have retirement, didn't have pensions. People would just work until they died. And the human relationships were much harsher than what they are now, especially in Victorian England, when kindness was not necessarily the first value. So therefore, the kindness of the Nivens is even more extraordinary. The kindness of Paul and his ability to just extract himself from the tropes of his social class and the tendencies that young men of that society had. I think it just made me fall even more in love with the characters and just to realize even more how extraordinary they were. Because I do think that, societies are really harsh at all times, but I think it's quite a privilege to tell the stories of people who are just slightly different and the people who allow the people to just become better versions of themselves. And I think Jane has that luck. She just finds people who just happen to be good people. And, the movie is like a very small section of her life, and I'm sure she's got a lot of issues with other encounters, but at least what we're studying is a study of human kindness, and of course there are limitations due to culture, generation, etc. But people do the best they can with what they have, and I think it's sort of humbling, because I think when we think about it, we all go through this. We'll think that we're going to be the best generation, and we can break the boundaries. And once you turn 40, you're like, okay, I'm doing the best I can.
That's a good segue to Odessa, talking to you about the sections where Jane is 15 or 20 years older than she is in 1924. She's with her husband, and kind of what anchors her in some ways. How did you sort of find ways into that aspect of the character and kind of find something to root to that?
I keep forgetting that I kind of started doing the movie without realizing that I was going to have to play that version of Jane, and feeling very shocked when I had to go get my face cast done to get all the prosthetics made, which, by the way, a big entry point into playing older Jane for me was the prosthetics and the incredible hair and makeup design by Nadia Stacey. I think that, like, looking at yourself in the mirror and understanding that there's a completely different person there is a pretty phenomenal occurrence. So that helped. That was one thing. And then, you know, I think that the way that Alice Birch wrote the Jane throughout her life was extremely deliberate, and the way that Jane uses language later on in her life is much more confident. You can sense that she has self-actualized. You can sense that she owns herself now. And when you get that dialogue, the physicality, the voice, that all kind of falls into place behind it, because in order to hold up these words, you need to give, you need to do something. And, a lot of Jane in her younger years is extremely non-judgmental, which is an entirely different physicality as well. And then as she grows older and she starts, having her own opinions and realizing actually what her life means and what her purpose is, then I think she just kind of gains this solid ground. And so that was another entry point. And then the other thing is that I remember having lots of conversations with Eva at the time about not wanting to make it a caricature, because I think it could seem a little ridiculous that I was 22 at the time. A 22-year-old is playing a 46-year-old, which it is, but I think we did okay. And I think that you had a lot of confidence in me, which gave me confidence in myself. And I think it was you saying, "Don't worry, we believe you," that made me kind of just, give into it and just try and do it.
Yeah, fake it until you make it.
So important to fake it.
Rule for the ages. What I also love is that in addition to seeing Jane's strength and her growth, you also there's a line in the novella about that she never could quite shake the inner curtsy that was that was always, even as a middle-aged woman, that was ingrained in her. And I feel like you see that in the performance in just little bits and ways. Yeah.
But also, that's also a credit to Odessa's own personality, because I think some 20-year-olds could never play a 40-year-old, but she's got this way of being centered that's just very mature. She's got this old soul quality to her. Yeah. And she played on a couple of very simple elements, like she's brought up as a maid when she's an orphan, and so she's brought up to not look at people in the eyes when she's in her 20s, which indicates a relationship of subordination. And when she's in her 40s, she's more assertive. She's just grown into herself, and these subtle shifts, you don't really notice them, but you just perceive them, and that just facilitates a lot of the physicality of it.
Yeah, even when she is given the typewriter and kind of doesn't quite look up to say thank you, it's she's kind of looking at the typewriter. Yeah, no, it's a beautiful aspect of the character. It's also so wonderfully elliptical, how we get little glimpses of older Jane throughout. And I just want to talk to you about working with your amazing collaborators, the editor, Emily Orsini, your DP, Jamie Ramsey, even Morgan Kibbe, who is the composer, and working with them on kind of the hints of the life to come, which I think is beautiful. What were some of the conversations like with all of those collaborators to make it happen?
Well, I want to give credit to Emily Orsini, my editor, and Morgan Kibbe, my composer, and who happens also to be my best friend. I've worked with them for 15, 20 years now, and I think it's allowed us to get deeper and deeper from film to film, and also allow each other a lot of space to fail, which I think is very important in creativity, because it's just not a straight line. And the editing process took 2 months over what we had planned because the movie was so complex narratively in terms of narrative strategies that we just had to figure it out. And Emily and I, we just spent hours talking, like looking at the board, just trying to figure out the right order, watch the movie again and again and again, because every time you moved like one little scene, even if it was 20 seconds, you had to watch the whole film to get a feeling of how it charged you emotionally before and after. And Morgan Kibbe, we had very early conversations, we had early tracks, but then the structure of the film kept on changing so much that at some point I called her. It was like, because she lives in LA and I live in Paris. It's like, I'm so sorry, darling, but stop working. I'm going to need to figure this out. We use temp music. I was miserable because temp music is never quite right. And, we figured out the structure, and then when that was done, she only had 3 weeks left to figure out the whole score. So that means that she pulled 14, 16-hour days, which when you create something is insane. And, I would have to pick her up in pieces every day, just like, you can do it, we're going to get there. Because I knew it was so important to have the music as it holds the film together. It's like a character, it's sort of, it comes in waves, and it's like this ritornelle, and it just accompanies Jane's grief, and it's classical and neoclassical and postmodern, like the actual writing. It's just so much a part of the film that it would have been unthinkable for me to do it with anyone else. And both Emily actually and Morgan are very much, co-creators of the narrative, and I just owe them so much. And it's a testament to the power of long-term collaborations, I feel.
It resulted in such a moving and artful and meaningful film. It's so beautiful. Congratulations to both of you. The film opens on March 25th. Congratulations again, ladies and gentlemen. Eva Husson and Odessa Youngl. The film, of course, is Mothering Sunday.
Thank you.
And I just want to say something. It's the 3rd time I present a film here, and this room and you guys are very, very special to me, because, in a career of filmmaker, when you have this kind of continuity, it's extremely meaningful. So thank you so much for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. Thank you.